Right. Yeah? Can you hear me? I'm not sure. I can't hear myself. All right. Okay. Hi. Welcome to my session. And this is it's kind of a travelogue. So it's a sort of personal journey of how I got into open source, and it's essentially about sort of contributing to open source rather than anything just what exactly open source itself is. And like I said, it's a personal journey, so it's not particularly very technical, but we'll touch on some points of that. And it's a beginner's guide. Right. So here's the agenda, and what I'm trying to do here is, as part of this walkthrough, as part of this journey, I'm hoping to kind of shed light on the why, the what, and the how. So why do people contribute to open source? What's the economic incentive for a developer, for an organization, and for an individual by himself as to sort of, why should they be contributing to it? And if they do contribute to it, what's the advantage to the community itself? What's the advantage to themselves on their own in the way they contribute to it? The second part of it is, what is in it for the organization? Now, not all organizations are like Hortonworks or like Red Hat, for example, or any one of the open source community organizations that have their entire business dependent on open source itself. Now, a lot of us come from organizations where we are consumers of technology rather than producers of technology. Now, this has a fundamental difference. It's fine for a company to say, we base our business model entirely on open source, and therefore our developers, our folks who are working in the company will continue to, will contribute to it as a paid-for job. Now, the ones who are lucky enough to do that, sort of more power to them. In my case, that's not true. I have a day job, and then I have a job. I have something where I'm primarily a consumer of the technology, but then I decided, why should I contribute? So I kind of thought, this was a kind of session I thought I should have been given when I first started. So that's sort of the idea behind it. So once we understand the why and the what, then it becomes a question of how. How do you actually go about doing this? Is there like a manual for doing this? And of course, there's the all-important question of, do you have to be a wise wizard to be able to contribute? And the answer to that, of course, is not really, but it helps. So if you're a wise wizard, it helps, but you don't have to be one. Right. So the why. Now, the first question is, why do I want to contribute to it, and how did I go about doing that? Right. Now, just a small background here. Most of my customers, most of the customers internally and externally, are interested in solving a business problem. They're interested in solving an analytical problem. They're interested in solving their particular pain point. They're not really interested in the in sort of what makes it turn. Are you using Hadoop? Are you using HDFS? You're using Cassandra, MongoDB? No one particularly cares. They're more interested in, let's try and find and resolve a problem, and let's see, what we can do to get there. So it's not about the technology. It's more about the business problem behind it. Now, because it's about the business problem behind it, I could not go to my boss, or I could not go to my customer and say that, we'll use X, whatever the X be. We'll use X. And he'll say, and so what? How does it help me? So to be able to do that, I did what everyone else does, which is I would look out for the announcements coming in from some of the major vendors, from the different market players. And what I quickly realized was that there is a new announcement almost every other month. Every other month, there would be something which comes in and says, this is going to resolve all your big data problems. And half the time, I would just be frantically Googling to try and understand what is coming out of this. And the sad fact and the reality is that a lot of times, what it says on the tin is not really what it does. So you would have something which says, this resolves all your X, Y, and Z problem. And then you would actually start using it and find that not really. That doesn't really happen. So I had two problems. One, I was trying to solve a business problem. Second is I was working with imperfect tools. Now, this is part of the ecosystem of the big data software world. It just is the way it is like this because it's comparatively immature. And therefore, because it's moving so fast, just to be able to keep up with what's coming out, it made more sense for me to be more effective. I had to look into the actual source to be able to do this. Now, when I say look into the source of it, does it mean one has to be a Uber developer to be able to do it? No, not really. You don't have to be one, but it helps. You don't have to be an Uber developer to be able to do it. And I'll go into it as to what are the things that are needed. So the first reason for me to look into this was to say, I want to be able to keep up with what's coming out. So I needed to go to one level below the marketing brochureware. So you wanted to be more effective for your customers, you need to go one level lower. That's also part of the sort of second point, which is the depth versus breadth of knowledge. A lot of the knowledge that we have in this field is very, very shallow. Again, this is primarily due to the immaturity of the ecosystem itself. To be able to understand all the new offerings coming into the market, it made a lot more sense to be able to delve into it, one, below the market brochureware. The second thing was, which I found very interesting, is to be sitting out on the mailing lists. Now, most of these projects have mailing lists. They have wikis. The wikis don't get updated that often. Not because people don't want to do it. It's because of lack of manpower, lack of resources. And I'll come to that later. So that's the second part of it. The third part of it is, quite frankly, just to level up. So if you are competing in the marketplace with n number of different consultants, contractors, vendors, market players, etc., this is kind of an easy way of leveling yourself up, because a lot of the work that goes into this is being done by very, very smart, very, very highly motivated developers. So what you are doing is, in essence, standing on the shoulders of giants. At least that's the way I looked at it. So my point was to say, I want to understand this a little bit more. I want to understand this more than the marketware. I want to understand this at a level of detail that I can be comfortable with. And the third thing was, I want to level myself up. So that was the reason why I said, OK, I need to go more than just look at the sort of brochureware that comes in, and therefore have to look into the source. Now, once you say that, OK, I want to contribute to it, the second question then becomes, where do you contribute? There are n number of projects. I mean, we've got the Spark masterclass going around, and I am a contributor to Spark as well. But when I first started off with it, I realized that the number of patches that are coming in, the sheer speed with which it was moving, was just too much to keep up. Same thing with Storm. That's another project which has got tremendous momentum. So if you've got a project that has got so much of momentum that you're spending most of your time just trying to keep up with it, where are you going to contribute? What you're going to contribute is a slightly different topic, but where do you want to contribute? And I use this thing called scratch your own itch phenomena, which is to say, choose a particular problem that is dear to you, that is closer to you. That worked for me. So we are looking at ingestion type problems, large amounts of data coming in. We want to be in a position to analyze it. And the first thing to do is to obviously bring the data in. And I found Apache NiFi, for example, is an easy way of understanding it. Now, what are the other features of it? Number one, it's not in beta, which means that it's a little bit more stable than some of the other projects coming in. Number two, the amount of code in there, the amount of documentation in there, the amount of mailing list traffic that is in there is not insurmountable. I mean, bear in mind that we are not talking about folks who are working at this as a full-time job. We're talking about folks who are doing this as something to level themselves up. So it's something that's manageable. Number two. Number three is, this is a problem that's close to me because it's close to a lot of my customers. So choose a problem that is dear to you. And hopefully it's not in beta. The point, which is walk rather than run, is a lot of guys, and this happens into a lot of the other contributors, people come in with a lot of motivation. You know, everyone goes, yay, I'm going to do this. They jump into it and then find that they're drowning. And this is not because of the technology behind it, or it's because everyone's mean to them or anything like that. It's more because what they have actually done is they haven't realized where they are in the continuum. So my suggestion is, and this worked for me, is choose something that you're comfortable with, i.e. choose a problem that is close to you, which means that it then allows you to contribute to something that is also, even if peripherally, related to your normal day-to-day work. Choose something that is at least solid enough that there is some level of structure around it, especially for a beginner. If you're coming in and doing this for a long time, then obviously you don't need to do any of this. But if you're coming in new, then it's kind of important that there is a structure around it, there is a methodology around it, there is a some level of hand-holding around it, which you can then say, that's where I need to start with. And obviously, pick something where you are comfortable with. So if you're comfortable with Java, pick that up. If you're comfortable with Scala, pick up one of the Scala projects. If you're comfortable with Python, so on. Now, since we're talking about the languages behind this, does it mean that you have to be an Uber developer for it? Not really. But just a nodding acquaintance with it itself is actually kind of important. And this was something, that's not my boss, by the way. This was something everyone gets, which is, so you're telling me that you're going to be spending some time doing this. What is in it for me? And this was kind of a cheat sheet I used to try and explain it within the organization, try and explain it to sort of my coworkers and colleagues and so on. The first thing is that open source technology is actually a business enabler. And how is it a business enabler? It is a business enabler because a lot of the actual code, a lot of the actual work that is being done within organizations in terms of R&D, in terms of development of algorithms and so on, is really infrastructure work. Now, there is a secret source in many places. So for example, if I take the obvious example of Google, Google is not going to release its search engine algos, but everything that enables the search engine algos is essentially not a business IP for them. And a lot of the organizations that we work with, a lot of the organizations that my customers are, I find that that's actually true. There is a lot of the fuffing about that is around it. There's a lot of fluff that is just pure infrastructure. So if you pick that infrastructure, either contribute to it or pick it up from the open source itself, you are in fact reducing your time to market. And that's one of the key things that is important here. What's the second thing? Knowledge value. There is a built-in knowledge around a lot of these open source projects. People who are contributing to it, people who are working at it at full time, there is an inbuilt knowledge value to it. It is almost impossible for a closed source company to keep pace with an open source company, simply because what they have is they have a lot of these surrounding externalities that allow them to leverage themselves up. So it is kind of a more organizational view of standing on the shoulders of giants. And there is a very, very well-known saying within the community, which is, given enough number of eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. Now, that's a very profound statement, and I learned it from one of the other sort of elders in the community. What that actually means is that the number of bugs that you get in your software, if I have hundreds of people looking at it, the bug is actually quite shallow. Someone somewhere would have seen it, and someone somewhere would understand how the bug is caused, and what, even in many cases, they would know what the solution for it is. Now, from an organizational perspective, given the way most of the organizations work, not everyone has got thousands and thousands of smart developers working on it. So in that sense, you get anything that you release as open source, or anything that you contribute as open source, has a very, very tight feedback loop. So one of the things that you will find once you start contributing, and I found this as well, is that if you contribute something that doesn't stand up to scrutiny, you will be told, and you will be told very, very quickly. It's not going to be something where someone's going to go and say, oh, this is nonsense, you can't do it this way, or sort of slap you down or anything. That's not what I mean. What I mean is there will be someone who will say that this could have been done better in this, and this way. And that tends to be a very, very quick turnaround. There is no Q&A process where you have got a bunch of people whose only job is to do Q&A. But this is part of the cycle itself. And that's a huge, huge advantage. There is one last thing here called sort of good feelings, which I thought about it, and then I kind of removed it. There is a general tendency for people to think that if you contribute to open source, you are sort of somehow earning karma, and it's sort of good feelings and happiness and meadow-like things everywhere. That's slightly true, but it's more of an economic incentive. This is by far an economic incentive, by far an economic need, rather than anything which is based on fluffy thinking and bunnies and stuff like that. This is really a pure, clean way of moving forward from an economic theory perspective. And I think that's something that is important to emphasize. There is one part of it which is a little bit tricky, which talks about sort of the legalese behind it, which is, so if you're working as a developer, or if you're working as a tech lead, admin, or you are a manager who's got other folks working for you who are working in that capacity, there is always the question of, are my people giving away too much? Are we giving away sort of our secret sauce? And there's then the question of saying, under what legal terms are you doing this? Now, I'm by no means an expert on this, but there's a bunch of sort of open source licenses, and this is just a sort of sampling of it. The most important one, I think, are the first two ones. The Apache license 2.0, and then BSD is there, and then there's GPL as well. So there's a bunch of these licenses, and one of the things that I found was it's kind of important to let the organization have a look at the license and say, okay, we're all in the clear because of issues around this. There is in a nutshell, if you look at it from kind of a 10,000 feet view, there are really two types of licenses, very grossly oversimplified explanation. One is the free as in beer, and the other one is free as in speech. And I kind of learned this as I went along, and I realized that this was important. The free as in beer is essentially someone buys you a beer, you drink the beer, there's no cost involved for you, you're done. What does that mean? That means that you are in a position to drink that beer, but no one is going to give you the recipe for the beer. So that's the free as in beer license. Then there is the free as in speech license, which means that not only do they buy you a beer, they're supposed to give you the license of the beer, or as in they are supposed to give you the recipe of the beer, and you're supposed to take that recipe, and if you pass it on, you're supposed to give them the recipe of the beer. Now, that's also in many terms called as a viral license. So you've got this is a very, very broad swath, and within the broad brushstrokes, There are two types. So you've got one is free as in beer. People can buy you a beer for free. You drink the beer, and that's where your right is. That's all you can do. And the free as in speech is people buy you a beer, you get the recipe of the beer, you can modify the recipe of the beer, and if you want to give the beer to someone else, you give them with the recipe. So that's the free as in speech license. Now, I don't fully understand where each one of these licenses lie, and which project is under which license and why, and all of those things. That didn't really interest me. So what I did was kind of go to this, which is the Apache Software Foundation. Now, one of the biggest advantages of the Apache Software Foundation is that they resolve all these problems for you. So you can focus on the initial why, rather than have to think about all the licensing issues, all of the other gumph that comes with it. There is another thing that is very, very good about this, which is they have, when a project goes into the Apache Software Foundation, so if you're thinking of contributing to it, bear in mind that you can contribute either via the Apache Software Foundation, or you can go through one of the other ones as well. None of them is good or bad. It just depends on your appetite. But for a beginner, when I first started, I realized that this made a lot more sense from my perspective because, number one, the licensing stuff was already clean. So large organizations had looked at it, found that it was good enough, which means that I didn't have to take this back and talk to our legal people and all the rest of it. That's one. The second thing is, from a purely new developer perspective, it has got all the things around it that you would need. So it's got version control systems that are specified. It has got wiki standards. It has got how do you send a patch standard. It has got standards around what are the things that you should be looking at, where are the mailing lists. All of these things are cleanly specified. So if you are working on one of the Apache projects and you get comfortable with it, you can very easily transfer that experience to the other ones. And that's a huge advantage because, bear in mind, we're looking at this from two perspectives. We're looking at it from the perspective of you're doing a day job and you want to be in a position to do this. You don't have, or at least I'm not lucky enough to work on an organization which pays me to do that. I'll probably be not good at it either. Right. So we saw the why. We understood the what, kind of discussed something around the licenses and stuff, and now the how. So how do you actually go about doing it? What's sort of the absolute first step? The absolute first step is documentation. You don't have to be a developer. You don't have to sort of show your chops and try and understand in-depth parts of the code or anything like that. You can start off with documentation. Now, every project that is out there has got somewhere or the other things that are missing that are part of the documentation that is missing. So for example, my first contribution to NiFi was how do I run NiFi on an IntelliJ IDE. Now, IntelliJ is, I'm sure you guys must have heard of it. It's one of the it's one of the IDEs used within the Java world. And so they had standards for Eclipse. They didn't have standards for IntelliJ. And I'm comfortable with IntelliJ. So this is the absolute basic thing that you can do. There is nothing that stops you from doing that without even fully understanding the underlying code base. Now, that's a slightly harder problem, and I'll come to it. So the absolute first step that I would suggest is start small, and when you're starting small, go through the documentation. You will find places where you can edit the wiki. You'll find places where you can contribute simple examples that do not exist. And some of these simple examples are things that you start off with facing it, but bear in mind that other people who follow in your footsteps will also have the same problem. So getting into a project, and this gives you free karma, by the way. Most project maintainers and developers and contributors are more than happy to get new people in and say, And if you come in and say, I'm going to contribute, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to add an example over here, I can guarantee it. You are quickly on the way to being a superstar. Everybody loves documentation. Once you're comfortable with that, comes the second level, which is, I kind of call it the replier. In a lot of projects, you will find guys who are, the actual contributors to it sometimes tend to be overwhelmed with the volume of stuff coming in. So what they want to do at that point is, they want folks who are in a position to answer the newbie questions that are coming in. So think, there is an analogy for it. It's called the eternal September. So every September, new university graduates and things like that find something like this. And you will find on mailing lists that the same questions which had been asked about 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, are being asked again. And unfortunately, a lot of the folks who are coming in don't really do proper search on it. Now, you are not in a position to do searches because of technology limitation in some cases, but in a lot of cases, folks are new, they don't really understand, and they come in and ask the same question again. If you're there as a new contributor, this isn't a great way of being able to contribute. You understand the topics that are coming in, and you go in and say, that's the answer to this question. There is a certain way of replying to a question, a certain way of asking a question, and a certain way of being able to reply to it as well. And this is, again, just a trick that I learned. Asking a question, when someone asks you a question, it's kind of important to understand the question in the first place. And you'll be surprised by the number of sort of incorrect answers that come into it. So just imagine the amount of communication gaps that are going on, because everything is being done on mailing lists or on IRC or on forums, and it's not really very clear. So that's one part of it. Try and understand, try and see what the better ones are doing. That's what I do, which is I look at some of the answers that I like, and I see how they have answered these questions. I try and find the patterns that these guys are using, who are sort of the elders in the community, and that really helps. One of the other things I realized was kind of writing your own experiences about it. Now, so in NiFi, for example, there was one of the contributors had written how they had done something, and now this was a specific problem they had, and it was within their very niche area. But what I found was some of the experiences I had by using NiFi, I followed the same template, but then I wrote it down on my own. And that helps. That helps you refine your understanding. That also helps you kind of be in a position where you automatically become someone people come to and say, oh, is that how you do it? And you go, yeah, that's how you do it. So that's another way of being A, useful to yourself, and B, kind of useful to the community. This is sort of the third stage. So the first stage I did was, like I said, contribute documentation. Second stage was sitting on the mailing list and sort of replying to stuff. The third one is the bug finder. This third stage of this. The important point here is really that second point, which is reporting a bug is actually harder than solving it. Most of the times, being able to identify the bug has got more value than being actually able to solve it. Now, this sounds sort of contradictory in terms. How can that be? The reality is that is like that because in a lot of projects, you don't have the exact same scenario that you're using available to someone else. So you could potentially be using a certain version of it. You could potentially be using a certain flavor of the OS or a certain flavor of JVM, which someone else hasn't tried. And there is suddenly a bug in a very corner case. Now, this happens in a lot of mature projects where you will find corner cases, which are simply not been documented, which have simply not been found. The solution might be really simple, but identifying the problem is extremely hard. And that has got a lot of value. one of the things I realized was being able to identify those kind of corner cases. And those corner cases, I'm not looking for them. I didn't go looking for them. I actually found them because I was just running it on my machine. And being able to identify it itself has a lot of value. I didn't resolve that particular problem, but I found just being able to say, if you do this, this, and this, then this happens. Now, you found the bug. Now, how do you report it? This sounds really silly, but I made a huge mistake around it, and I've made mistakes around this a few times. So I thought I'll kind of write this down. There is a way of actually being able to report the bug. So when you look at, when you go into a new project, every project has got its own unwritten rules of how you do it. And these unwritten rules are things that you learn as part of being part of that community. So NiFi has got an easy way of doing it, has got one way of doing it. The Spark guys have got another way of doing it. The guys who are on the ML side of Spark have got a completely different way of doing it. And similarly for Apache Qilin, for example. So, but even though all of them have different ways of doing it, there are certain things that are common across. And the certain things that are common across, one of the key things is be precise. Be absolutely precise when you're reporting a bug. So I've given some examples here. An example of a bad report is like the first one. Don't say things like, I tried, don't say things like, foobar doesn't work. That doesn't work. That means nothing. It means nothing to anybody. So, and you will find those kind of bug reports coming in, be it on your, Jira tracking list or be it on the mailing list. Help. You will find a lot of questions with a lot of people who send off these emails going, help. And you're saying, with what? And again, look at it from the other angle of it. So guys who are contributing to it, guys who know that part of the code, are probably way too busy to be able to look at that. So they automatically flag that off as something they don't want to look at because it's a time sink. So don't kind of do that. The second part of it is, foobar doesn't work when I press K. Again, not very useful. The third one is kind of the right way or a good approach to do this, which is be as precise and be as clean and informative as possible. Be more verbose rather than be succinct. So most of the time, the way that I actually give a bug report is I would put the top heading, which goes, that one is broken, and then I would have a 2-line summary of it, followed by a detailed report. And till you become a contributor, or once you become a contributor or something, you will love the guys who make these kind of bug reports. It's a huge, huge advantage. Huge advantage. The so-called master bug finder. You've found the bug, you reported the bug in the right way. The best thing that you can do after this, and this tends to be the first one that I resolved, at least on NiFi, was I could pinpoint where the code was broken. And I didn't know what the fix for it was, but I could pinpoint that, and I said, I found this happening. Obviously, it wasn't as simple as that, but I found this happening. Perhaps this is where we need to go and resolve it. And the one who was the main contributor to it, the one who understood that code, looked at it and said, that's it, that's where the problem is. And the fix took literally 5 minutes, but the ability to pinpoint that, that did take some time. And this kind of a bug report or this kind of a contribution that you make gives you as well as gives the community that is working around it kudos from both ends of it. What do I have as part of my list of doing things? I mean, obviously, becoming better. That's always kind of the to-do list. I need to get better at this. I find the first 4 things to be the more important ones, which is, A, you try and understand from the rest of the community as to how they work. You try and get up to their level. Some of the developers who work on this are phenomenally good, much more experienced. one of the things I realized was to be consistent with it. Due to work and other reasons, there was a time where, for a period of about 4 months, I kind of dropped out of it. And once you do that, you realize that the project has moved leaps and bounds forward. This is not just specific to NiFi, it could be any of the other projects as well. And that's the important part, which is to be able to be consistent with it. So even if you're not contributing something, I would always suggest stay on the mailing list, or stay on the IRC channel, or look at the forums and see what are the new problems coming in. What is the new state of the project that you have been involved in? Everybody can be a better applier. I definitely know that I can be. And you will notice that the last thing is about writing code. So in my head, the way I have thought about this is to say that in reality, the soft skills around this, the ability to understand this, the ability to write documentation, the ability to talk about the bug reports, the ability to find the bug reports, the ability to work with the other people in the community is sort of a lot more important than the actual act of writing code. It doesn't mean that the act of writing code itself is not important. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that that part of it is almost literally the last part that comes into play. And you can ask any of the other contributors as well. The first parts, the ones at the top, are the ones that are more important. It's rather much more important to understand what's going on there. It's much more important to be able to provide an example. It's much more important to be able to work with the other people in the community. And if you can write code, definitely that helped as well. So so initially when I said, do you need to be an Uber developer? I would actually go so far as to say that it is not even 100% required that you be a developer. That does help, but it's not even required. You can contribute in n number of other ways. And that's all I have to say, folks. Thank you. We've got a couple of minutes. I think, yeah, we've got about a minute. Yeah, please. Yeah, just go ahead. Yeah, you yourself. Yeah.
How much time each week do you spend on these subjects? Let's say from my point of view, I work at a bank.
Sure. I used to work at a bank as well.
I have a lot of time at work, like you said, I don't get paid to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
When I'm at home, I have 2 kids and a wife who apparently need attention as well.
I know, that's always a bad thing. Yeah, but yeah.
How much time do you effectively have and do to do this stuff?
When I started off, I spent a lot more time. And then the initial stages are harder. I'll be honest about it. The initial stages are harder. So I was spending about 6 to 7 hours a week. So, you come back from one day, come back in the evening and work on it and things like that. But that's, I think, one of the other advantages of working on a problem that is closer to what your company is looking for, your organization is looking for. I think that's one of the reasons why I said that. I found the fact that we were also trying to resolve a certain problem that NiFi was working on or Spark was working on. That would really help. But you are right. There's always less time to do it. Yes, please.
Do you find in the States you kind of went through this thing where you contribute to open source and employers were kind of skeptical about that, like why are you coding half hours and what are you doing?
Yeah.
Especially I've worked in a bank as well, and they don't want to do anything.
No.
But now it's kind of shifted where as a developer you walk into a shop and they want to see your open source project.
Absolutely.
You find the same here now?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I will emphasize, and we're kind of out of time, I'm around the place and I'm at the Teradata booth as well, but that's a really good point. I think one of the only things I would add to that is people forget that we kind of live in a tech bubble when we come to these conferences and things like that. But yes, you are right. I do find that a lot of employers, organizations are now waking up to the fact and say, okay, tell me what you've done on the open source side. I do find that, yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you.